Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. I'd like to wish everybody a Happy New Year and just remind everybody that can all phones be turned to silent or switched off. And for the benefit of the public at home, this meeting is not being live streamed but will be recorded and put on the Council's website at a later date. I will remind everybody of the evacuation procedure. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs, do not use the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside Lloyd's Bank on the opposite side of the road. Exit by the door by which you entered the room, or by the fire exits which are clearly marked and indicated by the standard green fire exit signs. If you need any assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff. Item number 2, apologies. I'm aware of an apology from Councillor Hartshorn, who is replaced by Councillor Harbison, and also Councillor Phillips. Councillor Shepherd, who's replaced by Councillor Watkins, and I have an apology from Councillor Beetham. Do we have any other apologies? Councillor Harbison.
Apologies from Councillor Kenya. Thank you.
Item number 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. For all those who are in attendance, I take it we've all had a chance to read the meetings. Is everybody in agreement that I sign those as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? Sign them when I find the place to sign them. Item number 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations which are not listed on the agenda? Councillor Tromans.
That I am Warwickshire County Council's representative on the West Midlands Combined Authority Transport Delivery Committee. Thank you.
Can we interest which they wish to declare? In that case then, item number 5, public consultation. I've been made aware of the fact that Mr Smith wishes to speak on item number 7. And we will move straight on to item number 6, which is the formal complaints and FOI requests report. And I shall hand over to John to present that.
So you've got the report in front of you. I'll quickly go through the summary first and then we can have a look at the details, and then if you've got any questions I will try my best to answer them. So I'm really pleased to report that for both complaints and FOIAs we have seen another year-on-year improvement, which is fantastic news for the residents of the borough. So if we look at formal complaints first, we're now on an average of 6 working days to complete the end-to-end process for complaints. The SLA, as you probably are aware, is 10 working days. So as an average, we're doing really well. And this has fallen year on year for the past 2 years, which is great news for the customers. We have put some additional processes in place, which I'll go through kind of a bit later in the summary, to kind of help make the process better and simpler for our residents and customers, and also to ensure that the quality of our replies meets the standards that we need. There was an issue with some of the, particularly the escalated complaints, that the standard of replies wasn't great, which was causing us a number of issues. I think it's good to recognise that an external body has come in and audited all of our processes. And we have now got the accreditation of customer service excellence, which is fantastic news. And I think it's worth noting that only a very, very small handful of councils across the country have actually reached this standard and managed to get this accreditation. So I think that's credit to all of the work that's gone on, the improvements that have gone on, and the professionalism of the teams involved. So there has been some work that's gone on as well in terms of just making the reports clearer and better. I think we did get some feedback at the last year to say that You wanted better clarity and greater drill down in terms of the subcategories that we report on. So I know one of them was housing, which a year ago we only reported one category, i.e. housing as a whole. But that didn't give us the clarity and the drill down that was required. So when you look at the reports now, you'll see that wherever possible, we have drilled down into the subcategory. So housing's broken into 4 categories now, I think. And that's an ongoing sort of fluid sort of movement, if you like. So if we do believe that we can provide better clarity for our residents and for reporting, then we will look at where we can drill down even further. So there are a couple of tables in here which have got lots of information in, but if I just run through kind of what they're saying. So in terms of formal complaints, the number of formal complaints so far this year has been 839, which gives us an average of about 120 a month, which is slightly up on last year. But sometimes we do get things of interest, let's say, that we might get lots of complaints about. So, for example, when the bin rerouting was completed recently, we did get an uptick in complaints. So stuff like that can sort of skew the numbers. As I've already explained, that we're now on 6 working days to complete a complaint, which against the 10 working day SLA I think is really, really good. And we have seen a gradual improvement over the last couple of years. You know, 2 years ago we were at 14 working days as an average against an SLA of 10 working days. So you can imagine there was lots of complaints that were taking 20, 30, 40 days to complete at stage 1. We've introduced a final check process, which is one of the things that I alluded to earlier. So for every stage 2 complaint now, I review the response at stage 2 to make sure that A, it answers the question, B, if there's anything that we need to do further to close the complaint, we do it, and just make sure that every stage 2 complaint meets the kind of criteria, i.e. it informs the customer of what we've done, it lets them know whether we've upheld their complaint, etc., etc. In terms of local government ombudsman referrals, again, this year we have seen a bit of an uptick in the number of referrals that have gone to the ombudsman. Now, I think that's kind of try to understand why that would be, and my personal view is that I think it's about the residents and customers being more savvy in terms of what they can and can't do. Obviously, we've got a 2-stage process, and if they're still not happy at stage 2, then we do advise them through all the closure letters that they can go to the ombudsman. And I think, basically, I think they're becoming more savvy in terms of that is their right to do that. I mean, what's pleasing is that although we've had an uptick in the number of referrals, the actual number of cases that have been fault found are only 4 so far this year. And although I've put we have seen an improvement, 2 of those cases, the planning cases, are historic cases which refer back to the previous year. So if you took them out of the equation, this year we've only actually had 2 fault found cases, which were both for waste management, where we had issues with Coventry recycling, not collecting the bins and missing bins, etc., which again we've tried to sort out. I've updated our vexatious customer process, which we're using quite comprehensively at the moment. So I do work with other service areas, particularly housing, where we do get a lot of customers that require a lot of attention, let's put it that way. And what I'm trying to do is help the officers and the managers in terms of clear guidelines from the not the ICO, which it says there, but the LGO, to make sure that we are treating every customer fairly, but where there's an undue burden on the authority, then we are kind of managing that with the resident, the customer, and letting them know that at that current time, then they are meeting this vexatious threshold, and then I deal with that separately. So the tables that are there on terms of formal complaints, I won't go through every single one, but you can see by service area and by subcategory how many complaints we've had for each area. Obviously, you'll notice that for parks, green space and for waste, sometimes housing and planning, but those two in particular, they have the majority of complaints. So it's really important that those two areas really get to the nub of the issue, get the complaints cleared within the SLA, because if they don't, they can affect, obviously, the average for the overall council. But I think going forward, I am focusing more on the ones that the complaints that are not completed on time. So forget about the average. It doesn't matter about the average. What we want to try and get to is that every single resident, every single customer gets their complaint answered within 10 working days. There are some changes that are being introduced by the LGO, which we'll have to do a little bit of work to bring our processes up to speed. They are due to come into place in February or March, assuming that everything gets signed off. One of the changes that's been proposed is that the stage 2 complaints no longer have a 10-day working SLA, 10 working day SLA. That will be a 20 working day SLA, but there's got to be a thorough investigation at stage 2. So there are some things that we'll have to look at to make sure that we continue with our good performance. In terms of foyers, again, we're seeing a similar improvement in terms of both the number of days it takes to complete a foyer and the quality of the responses. So obviously for a foyer, you've got a statutory deadline of 20 working days, and we are seeing that we're well under that as an average. We still get some foyers that go over, and again, we are looking at how we can help officers and managers to make sure that these requests are delivered on time. We do have an internal review process, which is something that was required by the ICO, which I've set up, which wasn't in place prior to my appointment. We've had 6 requests for an internal review so far this year. None of those have been upheld. We also now charge for FOIA requests where it's time-consuming or complex. You know, there is a time limit, if you like. The time limit is 18 hours. So if a FOIA request takes more than 18 hours to complete, then we can charge for that. And again, for all of the FOIA requests that have been over 18 hours where we've asked for a charge, then none of those requests have then been taken on board, if you like. So again, that's a real positive. So we've not got managers, officers spending hours and hours of time completing requests that we could charge for, if you like. We've done a number of refusal notices. Again, all of these I take really seriously. So if we're going to refuse a request, then I normally check with the ICO to make sure that it's balanced. And this particular individual that had issued lots and lots of requests, once we'd refused and explained to that person why, then all of these requests stopped. Publication scheme, I've set that up. It's now ready to go live on the new web. So once the website's up and running, the publication scheme will be there. This is something that we can build on. So it's basically an area on the website that we can hold information and point requesters to. So, for example, we get asked lots and lots about public health funerals. So where somebody's died in the borough, that we effectively, they've got no next of kin, we take on board. We get 2 or 3 requests per month of the same people. So we can actually set up a spreadsheet on there that gives all of those details. So those requests from now on will not have to be answered by an officer. They will get referred to the publication scheme. So again, you know, that's a real positive. The last 2 tables, again, break all the foyers down into the service areas and the subcategories, show you how many we've had. Obviously, it's a complete kind of opposite to the complaints. So if you look, that waste hardly get any foyers at all. But obviously, it's that kind of yin and yang. And that's probably it from me, unless you've got any questions for me.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thanks. Because although this says customers, I've put a number of complaints in about from customers, and there's nothing in here that say that, and I have asked time and time again that we have something that says how many complaints or freedom of informations come from councillors. There's nothing in there to say that, and I've had some of the responses from some departments is shocking, absolutely shocking. So if I'm getting them sort of replies, I'd hate to think what some of the residents are getting. And I've also got some that are over 12 months old. So we need a proper breakdown of the councillors putting in complaints as well. Complaints and freedom of information. Because if you haven't got that, you haven't got the full information. And I know that is wrong.
To that, so you're talking about members' inquiry forms rather than complaints. So we haven't touched on members' inquiry forms on this. As far as I'm aware, no councillors have put in a freedom of information request so far in the last 6 months or even 9 months. So if you've got some examples of that, then I'd love to see them. I think we speak about freedom of MEFs anyway. What we are trying to do, I've asked all the assistant directors to nominate a customer champion, because we are aware that with the changes to the processes that we've got to put in place with reference to complaints with the local government ombudsman, then there is going to be some work to do within each of the service areas to get everybody up to the same standard. And I will agree with you that some of the stage 1 replies haven't been good enough. And where we've identified that those haven't been good enough, then I've dealt with that with the manager, I suppose, the senior manager in that area. Obviously, for stage 1s, I don't get to see any of those responses. It's only at stage 2. But obviously, some of the stage 1s weren't great. They got escalated to stage 2. So, yeah, I think some of that I can deal with. If you've got some examples of FOIAs that you think elected members have put in that I can chase up, then that would be great. I can do that for you. I think the members' inquiry forms process is a different issue that we don't report on here. But if you want me to, I can bring that along to the next meeting if need be.
Come back in.
Yeah, you see the amount of members' inquiries. I know what you're saying, John, and it's nice to actually see you in the flesh. I've never seen you in the flesh, but you're right. But them inquiries that I put in are complaints from residents. So I've put, as you know, I've put quite a number, and I'm not saying you name the councillors on there. You just put councillor A, B, C, D, whatever you want to put, 1, 2, 3, 4. I ain't bothered about that. But you could put in how many councillor inquiries you've had. Just put a total in, and then all freedom of informations. But you do need the full information, because some of mine have not been replied to even now.
We could just have a column on here which says a grand total as the whole of the council. How many member inquiries have been put in across the whole of the council, and then that's just one number. Yeah, I think, is everybody in agreement that they'd like to see that on there? Yeah. Councillor Brown.
Just a minute, but before we start, this is really a good report, and it's a welcome report, because it shows that we've made real progress in terms of how we deal with complaints, having a properly managed process to deal with complaints, and we're achieving reductions in the time it takes to deal with complaints and freedom of information requests. I mean, I've worked in a business that was going for a European Quality Foundation Award. I know that you have to have this sort of thing in place, a 2-stage referral process, moderation of the 2nd stage, which we now are doing, which is fantastic. And that we're picking up learning points to improve process and the quality of the answers that we give. That's all really welcome. And with your permission, Chair, I think we should send a message of thanks to all the staff that have been involved at all levels in delivering this, because it just goes to show what we can do with a properly managed process, where we identify what really is a complaint and what's just an observation, if you like, and where we then deal with it professionally. You know, it's a real sea change that I'm seeing from 4 years ago, when things were less well controlled, shall we say. So that, two things. Have we publicised this? I would like to know, because if we haven't, I think we should. Because you know, we take it on the chin when we get things wrong. But I think we should celebrate things when we get it right and when we make changes that deliver results. So I really think that we should publicise this, and I think we should congratulate everybody that's been involved in bringing this about. And the other thing that I would actually really like to know is, we talk about vexatious customers. Do we actually have a disengagement policy in place? Because it's something I think we should have, so that if we have repeated customers that cause us problems and keep coming back with the same thing, even if they've been answered, then we should have a policy in place that shows that we've dealt with it, and that we've dealt with it consistently, and that we've disengaged with it in a way that we can account for and justify if we're asked to account for it in the future.
Because I've got a question that a little bit relates to what Damon said, even though he stole my thunder, because I was just about to say I think we should acknowledge the hard work that's gone into doing this report. But also, so on the fictitious sort of like complaints and the FOI requests, it would be really good, particularly on the FOI requests, if we could see the number of, say, like there's one here, just take for example, total leisure and culture, there was 27 FOI requests. It would be really handy to know how many individuals or groups or organisations made up that total of 27. Because if it's 27 individuals, that's slightly different to if it's 3 or 4 individuals just constantly sending in FOI requests. So I think that would be I don't know how the committee feels, but I think it would be really handy if we could see the breakdown of how many people make up that 27. And I think that goes along a little bit of the evidence towards the fictitious ones as well, because if you've got a pattern of people continually putting in FOIs, it builds up, because I say it looks different. If you've got 53 and it's 53 individuals, that's 53 people who have a concern. If it's 5 individuals, that's 5 people who have 53 concerns, which more than likely are the same concern. Just they didn't get the right answer the first time around.
In terms of the accreditation, I think we have put some something out on social media and in the employee magazine. I think what we could do is we could also put something on the new website, so that when you land on the customer page, it does say that we are accredited for service, yada, 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 to give you a bit of confidence as a customer, as a resident, that your complaint will be dealt with professionally, etc. I think in terms of vexatious, yeah, we have got policy. So we've got an end-to-end policy from what's the definition of vexatious behaviour at a complaint level and a FOIA level and a subject access request level. And that does go right the way through from a gentle email from me to say, your behaviour is becoming vexatious, these are the things that you need to do, right the way through to you are now restricted access to the monitoring officer only, and that is your one point of contact. The tricky bit gets is if somebody then continues to be vexatious and how we deal with that. And I've contacted the LGO and the ICO, and their guidance at that point is very vague. Now, we've never had somebody that's gone all the way to the end yet, so but we've got a couple of people that are getting there, so it'd be interesting to see how that works. The vexatious policy I've spread across all of the council, so everybody is adhering to the same policy now. There was a few sort of cottage industries, people doing different things. and I'm the sort of central point of contact for that. So if anyone's not sure, they contact me, and then we discuss the case, and I sort of mediate between, you know, what the officer's saying, what the manager's saying, and what maybe the resident or the customer's saying, and we try and make sure that everyone's treated fairly. In terms of FOIA requests, it's something that we could possibly look at. The only issue that I know that we've got is we have got some residents that use certain platforms. So you can send a FOIA request in and be anonymous, but you've got to have a valid email address. So, for example, we do get certain residents that use this whatdotheyknow.com platform, and what happens is the what do they know email address is always the same, and then it's a number of serial numbers at the end of it which signify whoever that goes to when it's sent off. So potentially we might have to think about, is it residents or is it platforms or something like that, but I might be able to give you, you know, a rough idea of what that looks like. Yeah, I mean,
so many complaints by a resident, so
yeah,
many complaints through this platform, but it would just be handy to know
yeah.
that what makes up those numbers.
I will say that I look at every single FOIA request, and if I see any sort of what we deem as vexatious behaviour by a resident, I will nip it in the bud there and then anyway. So I'd be very surprised if we do find that we've got somebody that's behaving vexatiously. For example, we do get some residents that are really interested in business, and they might put one in for waste, they might put one in for parks, they might put one in for so scattergun effect, if you like, but they're all different, so they've all got to be treated differently. But anybody that's you know, doing overlapping or repeated requests or the same information for the same, I will deal with that straight away. I'll nip it in the bud now.
Congratulations. I think it's a really good report, and having been somebody prior to becoming a councillor who has put in complaints, and I think I haven't raised any freedom of information requests, but I've certainly put in complaints, and I've seen a big difference in terms of how those have been dealt with over the last sort of 2.5 years. Since I've become a councillor, but also in terms of, I think there's been a marked improvement for members of the public as well, and certainly the members of the public I've spoken to are finding the system a lot better now. They're finding things are getting dealt with a lot quicker. Yes, I appreciate there are things that are slipping through the net. I know it's probably never going to be a perfect system, but it's really good that we're taking big strides in the right direction. Again, I would add my thanks, as the Chair and Councillor Brown have already said. The Chair has, and yourself have actually touched on what I wanted to, in some regards, go into, which is a freedom of information request. I'm very acutely aware on social media there are a number of individuals on various community platforms there who, you know, see it as a badge of honour to be able to put in as many freedom of information requests as possible. And although I'm not necessarily saying that I want to know how many is being put in by Mr. X or Miss So-and-so, again, they are entitled to that anonymity if they want to by going through other platforms, that's fine. What I would like to know is how, out of these 396 that we've had freedom of information requests, how many of them are coming from what I would probably class as a serial FOIA. So do we have any ideas of how many of these are accounted for, maybe by a very small group of individuals? I would like to know what percentage that makes up of our total, because obviously those 3 or 4 individuals could actually skew this quite a lot in terms of what gain. So we need to be able to sort of separate them out so we can look at it as holistically, but then also separate those 3 or 4 individuals out so we see what the rest of the sort of members of the borough are actually doing as well. So I would like to know that. And I'd also be very interested to know how much time is being taken up by people. So it'd be really interested if we could sort of put an estimation in terms of how long it's taken to deal with some of these requests. So are they 5 or 10 minutes of officer time, you know, or are they taking an hour, 2 hours? It's interesting, we've got 18 hours after which we start charging. Is that a nationally set or prescribed figure, or is that something we've set as a council?
So it's a figure of £450 or 18 hours. So anything over and above that we can charge. Anything under that we can't charge for. In terms of your other question, we've got 2 sets of people. We've got some, I'd say, let's call them business people, that, for example, I gave you the example of the porpoise funerals, public health funerals, that will send in a request every month for this information. So obviously the publication scheme will sweep those away when we get that up and running. I could probably write down on a piece of paper now the 5 or 10 residents that are really active in terms of FOIAs, and they will ask about lots of things, particularly if it's been in the paper or reported in the local news or it's a hot topic. We get the same ones, but because each request might be different, then there's nothing you can do really. You've got to accept the requests. I would say on average, an average FOIA request will take between 1 and 3 hours, I would say, usually, because the information, you've got to go find the information, you've got to then fill the dash form in, then if you take my time in checking it, it might go back because there's something wrong, then it gets sent off, it might come back, so yeah, probably maybe even more than that, probably 5 hours as an average. So, and just for your information, we get about 20 to 25 requests a month.
Anyone who is watching this evening at home or later on in recordings, if they are sort of serial FOIAs, I hope that they'll really think about this, because obviously the time that you're spending doing this is then having massive impacts, and is that information so critical that we need to be diverting people away from their jobs on a day-to-day basis? Yes, FOIs are important, but it's not a hand grenade, which I think, or a blunderbuss, which I think is how some residents are using it, to try and fire as much shot out there, and in the hope they'll hit something which will give them some sort of magic pay dirt against the council or against councillors. It should be sort of like a precision tool that is used to sort of really sort of dig deep into a specific issue. And I think we need to try and encourage members of the public really to use it as such. That information should be out there, but what we're getting is a few people who are tying up quite a lot of council times by the sounds of it, which is a little bit concerning. That they're just putting information requests left, right, and centre, and not for any real reason other than it's just things that will give them perhaps a political point that they can make, rather than something actually which will enable the council to do its work. So that's just me letting off a bit of personal steam there. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for entertaining me.
Wants to comment on this point as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on that last point, I think we just need to, as a committee, be mindful that any member of the public or outside of the borough and within the borough can submit an FOI. So it doesn't matter who asks it, we've got to respond to that. I don't particularly have an issue with John putting in some information in the report in terms of how many requests are being received by a particular individual. We can't share the personality or the individual for that, just to clarify that point. And I think based on the fact of officer time, that's the main idea behind the publication scheme, because there is, as an authority, we are bound by the transparency codes. We have to publish either monthly, quarterly or annually, in any case, specific information. And if we've already got that on the website, as an FOI response, we can divert the individual to that information on the website already. So that could be a relatively quick response. So it's just to remind members that the idea behind the publication scheme is to help officer time. If we're getting lots of requests in for the same type of information, if we can, we'll try and publish that to divert members of the public to that information. But also, just as a general point, that we do have to publish information anyway as part of the transparency code, and that will be the first protocol in most instances. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think for myself on the figures, it's not necessarily naming individuals. It would just be handy to know what makes up the number, whether it's 5 people, whether it's 5 different people, whether it's 53 different people. It would just be handy to know what makes those numbers up, because I think, as it's been alluded to, 396 FOI requests at a potential to run 18 hours each at £450 per request adds up to a considerable sum of the council's money and a lot of officer time to do those requests. So I think it would just be handy to break down some of the numbers and just to see how those are made up. Does anybody else have any more questions? Councillor Watkins.
Perhaps it would be good if the officers knew how to respond to some people and not tell councillors to go to the Ombudsman, because our councillors can't go to the Ombudsman. So a lot of the time I have to respond to the officer saying that I can't go to the Ombudsman. So if we wanted to save some officer time, then a bit of training on the response might be of some use. Thank you.
That very last point about the anonymisation platforms, I think just with and this isn't an answer that I'm looking for now, but something that officers should be mindful of, looking to the future, how is AI going to impact on that? There may be an opportunity there for people to set off an AI chatbot to just start issuing these things through these anonymisation platforms, and that could just overload us and other people. So we just need to be mindful of what might be coming down the track, because, you know, for everybody that's got a good reason for doing an FOI, and you know, we should encourage people to get the answers that they seek. There are a very small number of people who will seek to abuse the system and may employ things like AI and other technology to try and do that. So we should just be mindful of that. However, looking at this report, there's a general thread I want to pick up on here, which is, you know, it is, you know, we've you know, thanks to the officers and for the progress that have been made, absolutely. This to me isn't, though, an end. This is a work in progress. You know, many thanks and keep up the good work, but the good work does need to be kept up. We've got further to go to get this into really good shape. The first point that we should make is that, you know, this council is not afraid and should never be afraid of complaints. Complaint data is gold. It's brilliant. And signposting the Ombudsman and really making a point of explaining to people, actually, you can go to the Ombudsman is quite straightforward. You know, that's something that we should definitely be encouraging. People going to the Ombudsman is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's an audit, a free of charge almost audit for us, to say, well, actually, this complaint's been dealt with and we, the Ombudsman, have looked at it and, you know, we're upholding your view, Council. We heard from the officer and in the report that the vast majority of the cases referred to the Ombudsman finds in our favour, or the Council's favour. So clearly something is, you know, that's a good logic check for what's happening here. So I'm really pleased and encouraged by that. But as I say, this is all part of the good work that needs to carry on. The other some of the other good work that was highlighted there is the QA check, you know, the quality check that you do on the level 2 responses to make sure that they really do meet the needs of the complainant, that, you know, they may not like the answer, but has the answer been explained to them? Making sure that we're sending better quality responses. I think, you know, a number of councillors have mentioned that they haven't always been great in the past. They haven't, and the stage ones still aren't. Councillor Watkins made the point, I've had that. Actually, that merges into the point about them being treated as councillor referrals. Well, I'm very clear. If somebody is making an unequivocal statement of dissatisfaction, they are complaining. If they are saying, I am not happy, you know, I want you to do something different, I forward that on to customer service and say, specifically in the covering email, and I think all councillors should do this to avoid the issues that we've had in the past, say, please treat this and log this as a complaint. And bless them, the customer service team didn't do it initially, but they are doing it now, and that's much better. And so we are recognising and picking up more complaints, but that needs to continue, and the good work needs to carry on there again. In terms of the data that we're now seeing, they're much more broken down, and you've talked about adding some additional categories in there, Chair, and some of the other councillors here. I would agree with all of that. I think it's pretty good baseline data now, and adding those 2 or 3 bits of categories, subcategories to it will really enhance it. But now we've got that, we need to keep that format, and we need to track it, because the data in isolation is a bit abstract. You need to see what was the data 3 months ago, what's the numbers looking like now, what's the trend showing us. And indeed, there's space at the margin after those numbers to put a spark line in, you know, a little kind of graph to show what's the trend. Is it improving? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? We used to have coloured smiley faces in the reports years ago, but unfortunately, as they were always printed out in black and white, they were meaningless. So we can't really rag rate it in these. So a spark line or an indication of improving or declining performance would be really, really helpful. And I think we have to remember the audience for this isn't just councillors, it's the members of the public. So it's important that if we're producing these kind of reports, it makes sense to them as well, so that they can have confidence that actually, you know, if I make a complaint, it's going to be taken seriously and they are doing their best to sort it out. And here's the evidence of that. The Customer Service Excellence Accreditation, that's mentioned in this report. You touched on it yourself. It might have been in the employee magazine, but who gave us that accreditation, what was the body behind it. I think as we're recording this, we should get it on the record so that any member of the public that watches this knows what body it was that put us through a rigorous process, apparently, and gave us that accreditation, and what it means, and whether that's audited annually, and what the extent of that auditing is. Because the other thing I would suggest is that we might want to consider putting an audit of complaint responses, a quality audit in, as part of the work programme for the internal audit department, or now our outsourced internal audit department, because those guys look at so many local authorities. They're in a much better position now than our own internal audit team in isolation were in the past, to be able to say to us, actually, we've looked at your quality of your complaint responses, and compared to the stuff we see at other local authorities, you're here, or you're doing really well, or whatever it is. So I'd ask for that to be added in as well, Chair. Thank you very much.
It's a very valid point, because I think it would be good for us to see, particularly with the new auditors, where we sit with other authorities as to the standard. And one of the points, before I just give you a chance to come back in, John, is, again, with the data, it's great data, and I say it's a work in progress. There's great work being done, there's great work still to be done, and I think we've raised some very valid points in this room tonight about where there is room for us to improve. And I think one of the things that I would particularly like to see, I don't know how the rest of the committee feel, is how many of the stage 1 complaints that went to stage 2, particularly as you're now looking at the responses from stage 1 when they go to stage 2, how many of those stage 2 complaints are actually stage 2 complaints that could have been responded to better in the first place just by the response, or the fact that a blanket response was given which potentially did not answer the original complainant's question. And I think that's something that could be picked up on with the member inquiry complaints as well, maybe. Just how many of those complaints have then been escalated because the response they got in the first place could have been, like as you've said, could have been better. So I think that helps with the improvement work as well. Because if it's being highlighted that the initial response you gave was the reason it went here, and it's being all highlighted, I think that possibly could have the other effect of making sure people give an adequate response in the first place.
Accreditation was by a company called Customer Service Excellence, and it's a Home Office recognised accreditation. The accreditation lasts for 3 years, so we get audited again in 12 months' time. So we've got some recommendations that we've got to put into place to maintain our accreditation, and then in 12 months' time we'll get another audit, and it's an ongoing process. Then it's then up to us if we want to maintain our accreditation. Then we do another 3 years and another 3 years after that. In terms of ongoing audits, because we've got some changes coming down the track that we've got to comply with for the Ombudsman, there is a 6-month audit that they've pulled together that for local authorities to use to sort of self-audit that they are meeting the criteria. So my suggestion might be that we actually use that, because that will tell us if we are doing what we need to be doing. And I'll work with the customer champions from it under each assistant director to make sure that each area, each director has their own audit in place, and then I'll be the kind of adjudicator in terms of making sure that every director's audit has been treated fairly, and if there's any gaps in terms of learning or knowledge or stuff, then I'll sort of work with the customer champions to make sure that's completed. And then this may make your toes curl, but I will share one example with you. So yes, we have had some horrendous stage 1 replies. So on one particular stage 1 reply, I won't tell you where it's from, the stage 1 reply was a full stop, and that was it. So the officer put a full stop and sent it to the customer. And when I questioned, so that came back as an escalated. So the customer went slightly nuts, as you can imagine. When I questioned that, I was told that the customer was rude, and that's all that this person was prepared to do. So we have got some work to do. I do recognise that. And that issue has now been dealt with. But yeah, that's the sort of thing that we've got to nip in the bud. And it's a top-down, bottom-up process at the moment of trying to get us better at what we're doing.
you, President. So the recommendation is that this committee consider and note the information in this report, and I'm just going to add slightly to that that we also make a note of the changes and the additions that we've suggested. And with the committee's permission, I would also like to add, as you've just alluded to, that we're going to get audited again on this in 12 months' time, and there were some recommendations from the original audit. And it would be nice to see maybe in 6 months' time how we're getting on at achieving those recommendations that's been done, just so that the committee as a whole knows where we stand and that we're on track to fulfil all the recommendations that we were given. So is the committee happy with those? In that case then, all those in favour of noting the report? Thank you. We shall now move on to item number 7. Reviews of the performance management framework. I shall hand over to Matt to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is just to update members on 2 documents, one being the performance management framework and the second one being the risk management policy and strategy documents. We have done a review of those as part of our annual and ongoing review of policies and documents. And the reason why we've updated them is set out in section 4 of the report. That's mainly due to obviously us changing from what was once the delivering our future to building a better borough. Also the fact that members will be aware we've gone through quite a significant management restructure this financial year, so we've updated that to reflect the new responsibilities for specific officers in the structure. And also, obviously, there's a fact that we used to report to Cabinet on the strategic performance report, but now we go to each of the OSP panels as well, just to reflect that the policy aligns with what was happening in practice currently. And then the last thing is that we no longer have the 10, or what was once called the 10 performance software, due to an IT-related issue, in the sense that it wasn't compatible with our system anymore. We're no longer with that system, and officers are currently looking at options to replace that system with a different approach, so we can better provide all of the performance management KPI data to both the public, officers and members as well. So the report itself has got both documents attached, and it has got track changes on it. As you'll see, most of them are relatively light touch and just reflecting those key points I've mentioned there. And then ongoing, this will then be updated subject to the approval from this committee today, and then we'll only update that in the next 2 years if there's any key significant changes or any other changes we need to be aware of. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, but I'll take the report as written.
Thank you, Matt. We have a public speaker on this. Mr. Smith, looking forward to what you have to say on the review of the performance management framework and the risk management policy. Just to remind you, you're here to speak on this report and this report only. Any variations from it, and I will interrupt.
The report bears any relation to reality, like nothing this council does bear anything to the reality of the people that live outside of here. Yeah, this is another more management. Yeah, very, very poor management here. This is no reflection on the frontline staff, who I feel for deeply. The cabinet members and executives of this council are absolutely shocking. They lie, break, bend legislation. The training here must be awful. Yeah. It's just ridiculous the levels it's got to now with this council. Yeah, you use legislation, misuse it, yeah, to hide up the corruption and mismanagement. What?
You are here to talk on the review of the performance management framework.
Well, I'm doing my review
I'm going to
on
make
the levels of corruption.
Right, I'm going to
yeah,
make this, I'm going
lies.
to Mr. Smith. I am going to make this point to you. You have sat in this chamber on numerous occasions,
yeah,
and you've alluded to the fact that you believe the council is corrupt. Please.
Most definitely. I'm not the only one.
Please provide the evidence to the monitoring officer, so this committee, because that is what this committee is here to look at.
What is the point of that?
Well, you're sitting here
and
you're telling us.
I've reported it to the police. They won't even investigate it.
Have you
as you well know. You well know.
Mr. Smith, have you given what you have as evidence to the monitoring officer for the monitoring officer to investigate?
What's the point of a monitoring officer?
Well, you just sat there and made an allegation, which
Yeah.
we're asking you to
If you
provide the
don't,
evidence.
if you can't see the corruption, ignorance is no
Mr. Smith,
excuse in law.
Mr. Smith,
Yeah?
are you going to continue to speak on the report?
The report, the executives in the pad are more useless pen pushers, yeah? Right? Management and incompetence, no reflection on the
Mi-
frontline
Mr.
staff who have to put up with you lot.
Mr. Smith,
You're
Mr. Smith,
corrupt.
right, I look forward to you providing the evidence to the
As
monitoring
you know,
officer.
there is nowhere to provide the evidence to.
Matt is sat
You know that.
Martin is sat next to me as the Deputy Monitoring Officer. He shall look forward to you providing the evidence to back up the allegation that you have just made. If you're going to come into a council chamber and make an allegation of
Yeah.
such that you've just made, I and Martin will look forward to receiving the evidence.
What is
And,
the point?
as
it
of
goes
now-
no further.
As you are now,
It goes no
have
further
you
than
finished
you
with what
lot.
you have you
Yeah?
finished with what you want
You
to speak
bend,
on the report?
break, change the rules
Thank you
to
very
suit
much.
yourself.
We will move on with the.
Yeah?
We will move on.
As you
Thank
always have.
Councillor Tromans.
Stated basically just to mark up some changes to references because certain names have changed and we now have a different management structure. So the only question I've got is about the now defunct risk management software that wasn't compatible. We've been told that officers are currently looking at a replacement. Can we have some idea of timescales for that to be in place?
In place in the next 12 months. We are looking at potentially using software we currently have in-house. It's just understanding how we can get used to that in terms of the training of it and then the delivery of that across the council currently. What's noted in the report is obviously previously we've paid externally for the software system, and obviously given challenges that we're facing financially, we are looking at how we can better utilise as part of our transformation budget a more prudent financial way of being able to report that data internally across the entire council and how we then publicise that on our new website. So the plan would be the next 12 months.
My only concern, and it's great, really good, if we're going to use existing software we've got and reconfigure that in another way to save the public purse. I think that's a really good idea and to be commended. But what that can't be is us learning how to create a new piece of software and spending, months, maybe a year or two or whatever. So your answer in terms of we're going to save some money by repurposing existing software is great. The answer about 12 months is not so great. I think we would expect that, given that risk is a major factor here for this council, that we would have something fit for purpose in place before 12 months from now. So certainly within 2024. If that's not going to happen, then we probably do need to bite the bullet and maybe see if the internal audit, outsourced providers can give us some help and some steer on that. Maybe there's even an interim solution we could look at that was cost effective while we would develop our own in-house capabilities. But I don't think the council can go for, a year or so and that lead on without having that covered. I'm sure that's not what you meant. You were seeking to reassure us by saying 12 months. All I'm saying is I think the expectation of this committee is it need to definitely be within 12 months. Thank you, Chair.
Acknowledge that, Councillor. It's obviously looking at our capacity in house, etc. But yeah, completely appreciate that. That's the goal, to get that done in that time. What I would also say is that we have updated our OSP reports to obviously factor in some of that information. So we are already publicising that. It's how we collate that centrally and have it as a dashboard, so to speak, and how that visually looks. Now we can present that. So we have made some initial improvement in terms of where that's reported. It's just trying to finalise how we build that dashboard, so to speak, so we can then present that in a better way.
To provide us regular updates as to how that is going along. Any further questions? In that case then, the recommendation is that the committee approves the changes to the performance management framework and risk management policy. All those in favour? That's carried. Moving on to item number 9, the contract procedure rules update. I shall hand over. 8. Public protocol change to the Constitution. I do apologise, I was getting ahead of myself. Over to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This is another report with very similar small tweaks to a report, to a section that's already in the Constitution. So Historically, the committee have looked at this as part of the Constitution ahead of scheduled borough elections. It hasn't been done for a little while, so this is a kind of periodic review of it. There are a few small tweaks to the publicity protocol. A few things to highlight if I can. One thing that's become more clear in local authorities more recently is that people will see the publicity protocol as a election time thing only. Well, actually, the code and the rules around this apply year round, and we just have a heightened period of sensitivity at election time. So that's one thing. So we've taken out that line in the top there to say this applies year round to officers and members equally, but there are special considerations during election time. So that's just one thing to say. And the second thing is we've just taken out some references to specific legislation that have become out of date. So we'd rather have a broad approach rather than referring to specific referendums and things like that. But hopefully relatively minor and easy for members to approve today. It will go to council at the next time and then changes to the constitution.
Does any member have any questions? In that case then, the recommendation is, as set out at point 2, all those in favour? That's carried. And thank you, Matt. Moving on to item number 9 we'll do this time. And I shall hand over to Matt to give us an update on the contract procedure rules.
Thank you, Chair. So just for the benefit of the committee, again, similar to Martin's report in the sense that these are a set of procedure rules. Did you hear any of what I said, or do you want me to repeat? You can, okay. Where was I? So, as per Martin's report, this is very similar in the sense that the contract procedure rules are part of the council's constitution. We have, as a result of the senior management restructure that took place this financial year, done a review of that, and notwithstanding that, the fact that we've now got royal assent for what will be the new Procurement Act, we have therefore completely departed our ways from the European Union. So these contract procedure rules therefore have been updated to reflect not only the changes to the revised senior management restructure, but also removing reference from anything to do with the EU procurement regulations as a temporary measure, notwithstanding our departure as a result of Brexit. And I think at this stage it's just worth noting to the committee that we will be looking to come back in the next 10 months or so, because we are, as a result of the Procurement Act, waiting for secondary legislation to come through, at which point we'll then have a revised set of contract procedure rules which the council will be governed by going forward. So, as written, Chair, if the committee are happy with the proposed changes to the contract procedure rules, which are minor, we would then recommend to the council for the constitution to be updated. But happy to take any questions or queries anyone has. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? In that case then, as this again is just a procedural document and changing the wording of it, the recommendation at point 2 is that this be recommended to the council and the constitution be amended accordingly. All those in favour? Is carried. Moving on, item number 10, which is the annual governance statement for 22-23. And again, I shall hand over to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an annual report that comes to the committee. Particularly this one relates to the 2022-2023 financial period. Typically this would come at the same time as the statement of accounts, but mindful that that hasn't come as of yet, we thought we'd get this one prior to the statement of accounts to make sure we're not catching our tails next financial year. So what the statement sets out is a review of the corporate governance and internal controls at the council during that period. So it's 2022 to 2023. It sets out within there the key changes that the council undertook during that period, some key observations and some key comments, and alongside that, and then an action plan for the period of 22-23. It is a procedural and a governance-related document to sign off the fact that the council has got sufficient arrangements in place, covering a wide range of governance-related issues. And fundamentally, the report is as written, and it's for the committee to consider that that is a sufficient statement for the governance arrangements for the 22-23 period, and I would just make clear that this has gone through internal management team at the council and has had consultation with the appropriate directors as well for their particular service areas. But happy to take any questions, otherwise move the report as written, Chair. Thank you.
Does any member have any questions? Councillor Tromans.
Just an observation, it's got draft as a watermark on it, which we're not used to seeing. Normally it's the final stuff. And I'm not 100% sure on what we're being asked to do here. In terms of a statement of, what happened for the year up until the 31st of March 2023, I get that. It's in line with what we've seen in previous years. If we're being asked to say, is this a complete story in its own right, I'm not quite so sure, because if I start looking through the actions at the back, there's a whole bunch of actions there that are for January and February and whatever, for 2023 and November 22 or whatever. It doesn't say whether those actions were ever completed. So at what point does the loop get closed on these? Who will get to review that? Will that go to full council, or will it come back to us, or are we waiting for the auditor's opinion? Thank you.
Typically, this would come shortly after the end of the financial year, which would do that review and come back and say, in that financial year, we've undertaken this. These are the next actions for the following financial year. There's been a delay with the way that this report's come forward because of the senior management restructure and change in responsibilities for strategic directors, and also change internally. So it's taken us a bit longer to get this report ready. So I appreciate it does appear slightly out of date in terms of when we're reporting it today. But like I said earlier, typically it would come alongside the statement of accounts, but I think members are fully aware of the situation with the statement of accounts, not only locally, but nationally as well. So it is slightly out of date to a certain degree, but it's a true reflection of what needs to be worked on as an action plan, that is, for the current financial year. And when we come to do the 23-24 assurance statement, that will then provide an update on those actions and whether they've been completed or not, or where the progress is at that point in time.
And the actions that are all here that are, rolled over to 23-24, February 23, all the rest of it, the response to those targets, whether it was completed or not, will be shown on the report that we get for this year, and that's likely to happen when? Q3?
So for the 23-24 annual governance statement, we'll be looking to report back in Q1 of the next financial year. So by the end of June 2024, there'll be an update, because that's
there
when we
will.
plan
So
to.
we haven't got long to wait before
Correct.
These get updated.
Correct.
Okay, on the assurance that they will be in that, Chair. Thanks.
Councillor Brown. I'm sorry, you did put your hand up and I missed you.
Stand this correctly. Page 100, performance management. Under heading, I take it it's correct that we historically referred to the 10 performance management system, but going forward we will not, because as we've just heard in the previous item, we've discontinued it. Right, just want to make sure I understood this correctly before we go any further. Thank you.
It relates to April 2022 to March 2023 when the system was live. And like I said earlier, we are still slightly playing catch up with this assurance statement because of the senior management restructure and statement of accounts. So yes, that is correct. But it was live. Obviously, we don't have that live now, and we're now into the next financial year, which is 22-23. So yeah.
If there are no further questions, then the recommendations at point 2 are the findings of the review in corporate governance and index control as set out in the annual governance statement be considered, and the annual governance statement is approved. And for clarification, this is the historic statement for 22-23. All those in favour? Those passed. And as I'm not aware of any other business, I would like to thank everybody for coming this evening and bring this meeting to a close.